WOWD LP Takoma Park.
Let us now ascend the spiritual mountaintop, where we may expand the horizons of the mind and achieve a state of cosmic consciousness that will bring you the fulfillment of all your dreams.
Lost treasures.
And has anyone inquired about the butterfly?
Lost treasures.
Transformando la mente en la música desde el 2018.
Lost treasures. Lost treasures.
What makes an album truly great? And how do critics today objectively reflect upon a musical artifact that entered this world in 1985 via 50 hand-produced and decorated cassettes? Behind me, you hear an instrumental track from what's both an amazing lost treasure and a truly great album, Gareth Williams and Mary Currie's Flaming Tunes. Gareth Williams, former bassist of This Heat, and his childhood friend Mary Currie never set out to start a band with their Flaming Tunes project, nor did they ever perform live any of the 11 tracks selected for their self-produced and self-released cassette simply titled Flaming Tunes. It was 1983 in London, and Gareth Williams had just returned from almost 2 years of studying Indian dance on the subcontinent when he moved into a house in Balham, about 5 miles south of the Thames River. Instead of reuniting with his old bandmates in This Heat or returning to his old job at the HMV record store at Leicester Square, Gareth cajoled his old friend Mary Currie to participate in musical exercises and to take part in making an extremely personal bedroom recording. Borrowing a 4-track from a local arts organization, Gareth spent his days working out parts on piano, guitar, and various other instruments, while Mary took up the position on clarinet, percussion, and vocals. And while their musical friends, like Charles Bullen of This Heat and Mick Hobbes of The Work and other UK bands, make guest appearances on a few of the tracks, Flaming Tunes is wholly infused with the musical inventions of Gareth and Mary. In 1985, they released a limited edition of 50 hand-colored cassettes on the made-up Contagious Tapes record label. For 25 years, this musical gem seemed lost to the world. That is, until Mick Hobbes remastered it and released it on his Life and Living Records. And now, thanks to the beautifully repackaged and pressed vinyl from Superior Viaduct, this one-of-a-kind treasure has been well documented and preserved. I had the wonderful opportunity to sit down recently with Mary Currie to discuss her own musical journey and the circumstances that led to Flaming Tunes. Mary was joined by her longtime collaborator and close friend, Mick Hobbes. Let's hear from Mary about her early days and her initial contact with Gareth Williams, who sadly passed away from cancer on Christmas Eve, 2001.
I grew up in a suburb of London. I didn't really come from a musical family. There was music in the house. My dad used to sing quite a lot, and the sort of things that he sang were Bing Crosby, Al Bowley, that sort of era. And he also used to sing something called Mersey Dotes. I don't know if you know that.
Mersey Dotes and Dozy Dotes and Little Lambsy Divey.
Yeah. So it's like a silly little
Divey too, wouldn't you?
So it's like a sort of nonsense ditty, but it's like that kind of close harmony group singing. And it's something that I'm working on at the moment to actually do as a live performance sort of in a couple of weeks' time. So that's really nice. I mean, I had an older brother. So I think when one has an older sibling, there's music around. So we're talking about...
Yeah, I found that too, certainly, with my brother Pete,
the early 60s. I mean, the first single that I bought was Cliff Richard. And I know that the first single that Gareth bought was The Shadows. Apache.
I remember Nick's story about him not knowing how to pronounce Apache and asking for it at his music store and getting funny looks.
Well, he went to the music shop and said, "Can I have a peach?" And the guy didn't know what he meant, which was really embarrassing. But and the first sort of gig I went to was I saw the Beatles in 1964. They did a Christmas show at Hammersmith Odeon, and it was along with Freddie and the Dreamers, the Mersey Beats, all that crew.
Yeah.
And I was 10, and my aunt had managed to get some tickets, like God knows how, and all I remember was just like screaming, lots just girls screaming and standing on the seats, and it would be slightly terrifying. But yeah, my brother was into Bob Dylan, and had Stones and had Beatles albums. I mean, he bought She Loves You in 1963 or something, which I then took to some kiddie's birthday party when I was 9. And then we stopped playing the games and started doing a bit of dancing, which was fun. And then I suppose I've progressed on to soul, Tamla Motown, that kind of thing. And then when I was going through my sort of skinhead phase, blue beat, rocksteady, that kind of thing. And used to go to gigs when I was about 16, sort of at a local venue. Saw bands like Taste and the Groundhogs and that kind of thing. So that was it. And then I never learnt an instrument. I mean, we didn't have music lessons, or I did go to a church school, so we sang lots of hymns, and still like singing hymns actually.
Where in London exactly?
Well, it's called Wallington. It's also where Gareth lived. It's I suppose you'd call it a London borough now, but in those days it was Surrey. It was sort of just out of London, I guess.
Yeah, me too. I grew up kind of on what was the fringes of London then, but is now part of the whole Greater London thing. Mm. And I was in the northeast while you were in the southeast.
That's right, yeah.
Croydon, I would say, is a good name for identifying
Croydon
a place near Wallington.
And where there was music as well.
Yeah.
And like the Rolling Stones played there. And
well, everyone did at
David
the
Bowie.
Fairfield Halls, yeah. Well, like Mary, I had an older brother, and he brought kind of Hendrix and Cream into my life. So planted the idea of what you can do with an electric guitar. And I listened to anything that was available, which wasn't such a lot in those days. I remember often going to bed with a transistor radio, and like many would tune into Luxembourg, you know, like at the time of Telstar by the Tornadoes, you would hear it half a dozen times a day. And at a young, impressionable age, it made an impression, you know.
So I first met Gareth probably in about 1968 when I was about 14, 15. And he was friends with my cousin, and I shared a house with my cousin and her family. And they were involved in the Arts Lab movement. And so I glimpsed him round at our house, you know, once. And then about a year later, he and Nick arrived in the sixth form of my secondary school. Comprehensive school, and yeah. But he didn't really go to school very much. He didn't like school. School was always a bit of an issue for him. So he was always being sort of, you know, the people from education going around to his house and finding out why he wasn't at school. But and I think, you know, the sixth form at this school was a bit more liberal than where they'd been, but he didn't stay very much. So although I sort of saw him at school, I didn't really get to know him. Didn't really get to know him until after he came back from Newfoundland, where he went. So he came back in 1972. He left school and, you know, wasn't doing anything, hadn't got any exams. I think he might have got French because he loved speaking French. But so I think he got packed off to Newfoundland, where his parents' friends had their son had some kind of drug rehabilitation unit in Newfoundland, and so Gareth went along as sort of, you know, work experience, I suppose, and spent about a year there. And then I met him when he came back, and about a year after I met him, again, the three of us got a flat together, and that was in about 1973, and that was in Croydon. So yeah, when we moved into our first flat in around 1973, three of us, Gareth was working at HMV record shop, where he was the manager of the pop and sort of rock department. And he, I guess at that time had a huge record collection, and obviously had access to as many albums as he wanted because he could just order them in, you know. But he was listening to things like, well, Magma was a you know, a big one, and Van de Graaff Generator, Peter Hamill. He was very keen on Peter Hamill. What else was he listening to? Nick Drake. So quite eclectic. Captain Beefheart was a big one as well, and he enjoyed going to see lots of films as well. I mean, the record shop was up in the centre in the West End of London, right at Leicester Square, and he managed this department downstairs in the shop. It was his master's voice shop, and the downstairs department was the classical department, and the staff down there were very sort of serious about their classical music, but in order to get downstairs they had to go through the pop and rock department, which was often blaring out, sort of Magma and all sorts of, you know, Peter Hamill wailing, and so they'd kind of put their hands over their ears and sort of rush downstairs into the sort of, you know, the tranquility of the classical department. But I mean, he just loved music, and so would you know, sort of experiment with lots of different things and say order different things in. And he would sort of entertain the A&R people, and they would offer him lots of deals on, you know, sort of if he ordered 50 of Six Wives of Henry VIII, you know, by Rick Wakeman, then he would get a television. So then we'd have to sit and then sort of like scratch them all and send them back as faulty because no one wanted to buy them.
So what
But
you
he
did?
But he got the television, yeah. When Gareth was working at the record shop, he met Jeff Lee. And Jeff Lee was part of Henry Cow at that point. So this was probably 73, 74, something like that. So he was busking in and around the shop and around Leicester Square. And so he'd come in with all his change into the record shop and would ask Gareth to change it up into sort of notes. And so they got quite friendly. And through Jeff, I guess he must have met Charles. I think that's how it went. And he was working.
Which Charles?
Well, Hayward and Bullen. Well, they came as an item, didn't they? Yeah. So that's how he got introduced to that whole sort of world. And he was very interested in Henry Cow, and he and I went to the Manor where they were recording an album, and he interviewed them, and that was probably in about 1974. And then he became the manager of a group called Radar Favourites. So when this heat first got going, they used to rehearse at Charles Hayward's parents' house in Camberwell. There was an upstairs room, and they and that's where they rehearsed. And it wasn't until probably 1976 or so that they got the rehearsal place, which was called Cold Storage, which was an old meat refrigerator in Brixton, and they moved there and made us more of a studio. But before that, they rehearsed at in Camberwell.
I met him when this heat were starting up, really, through going with my colleague Alec from Family Fodder and other things to have a play with them as a 5-piece. And I played a bass guitar. It was at Charles Hayward's mother's house.
In Camberwell.
Yeah, you know, a mile from where I now live still. Some of it was good and some of it wasn't. You know, they were on a trajectory, the three of them. I think they knew where they were going, really.
just heard a live recording of the band This Heat performing their song SPQR from the album Live 1980-81 and featuring Charles Hayward on drums vocals, Charles Bolan on guitar vocals, and the focus of today's Lost Treasures episode, Gareth Williams on bass. If you're just joining us, my special guests are Mary Currie and Mick Hobbes, who are sharing their personal stories about the late Gareth Williams, their close friend and collaborator. Let's get back to Mary's memories of Gareth's musical and artistic endeavors after he left This Heat in 1981.
So I guess Gareth was interested in making recordings while he was with This Heat. He's always exploring different ways of, sampling and using that in his performance. But I think he was much more, in terms of Flaming Tunes, I think that developed in his mind while he was in India. Definitely. I think that was, and it was about him developing a voice, a vocal style, because he's not one of the vocalists in This Heat, certainly not. He screams a bit on one track, but he's not, he doesn't feature. And I think it was something that he really wanted to do. And I think when we had the opportunity...
I'm sure it was, from all the listening he did and what he was interested in and what happened after, he would have been interested in developing his own voice. Yeah.
And I think it was something that he was quite shy about. I think we were both quite shy about singing and actually using the voice as an instrument, rather than, a bass guitar or, keyboard or whatever. And so that was kind of, that's how we started out really with Flaming Tunes, just sort of singing. Gareth left for India in January 82. He'd split from This Heat. He'd met some German women who were quite fans of This Heat. He'd met them I think probably while they were playing in Germany, and they were interested in Kathakali dance, South Indian Kerala dance, and I think he got a bit obsessed with it, and so This Heat his participation in This Heat came to an end, and he felt like he wanted to explore this idea of dance and going to somewhere very different and just starting again, I suppose, and just having a different focus. So Gareth left for via Germany to India in January 82, and he was there for about 18 months. I think what he learnt while he was there was that in order to become proficient as a dancer, you would need to be there for years and years, to get anywhere near, not professional, but to be competent. And I think that was disheartening, and I think he was also very homesick. I think, money was difficult. He couldn't get any money. He'd run out of money. He didn't know what was going to happen. He got sick. He got, hepatitis, and was sick when it was the monsoon. And I think, from being very enthusiastic about being there and learning dance and this being a whole new experience, being in India, being, in a completely different world, then things started to become a bit more, I think, there was arguing amongst their sort of group, and he became, I think, looking forward to coming back. And he wrote copious letters to myself, to Nick, to other friends, and he asked that we would keep these letters as it was sort of his diary, really. Yeah, so Gareth kept letters, wrote a lot of letters while he was in India and sent them to us in England, and asked if we would keep them as some form of his diaries. And the actual writing, he did become involved in writing for the Rough Guide to India, but that was after he came back from India. So it was really, while he was there, he was very much just taken up with dance, and also his favourite thing was to sit and keep time at the front of the class, which was, and I think he really missed making music. He linked up with an American woman while he was there who lived nearby, and she had a piano in her house, and he would just love to go there and play. And in his letters, he was talking about when I come back, let's do music. Let's kind of do something. And I, while he was away, I'd been doing some singing with a mutual friend of Mick and mine, sort of part harmony singing. And I'd sent him a little cassette of stuff that I'd been doing. I'd never sung before, and he really loved it. And he said, oh, when I get back, let's do some. So I was a very willing participant, and I had time, unlike a lot of other people, to spend with him and to develop something that ultimately became Flaming Tunes. So when Gareth came back from India, I think it was probably around October 1983. So he'd been gone about 18 months or so, slightly longer, nearly 2 years. And he looked so different. I mean, he just looked so sort of svelte, and toned, and he looked sort of very Indian, got a sort of Indian haircut, and he was so enthusiastic about what he'd learned and all the legends and the stories and the Rama and Sita and all those kind of stories. And so he was forever just talking about it. He'd been so strongly influenced by it. But he was living back in a shared house in South London in a place called Balham, which was there was probably about 7 or 8 people living there at any one time, and he had a room or couple of rooms on the ground floor with a piano, which I think you can probably hear featured on Flaming Tunes, and he wasn't working at that point. He was, but he was always around quite a lot, and he just, there'd be people around all the time, and there'd be instruments, and so people would just sort of drop in and out. But I suppose I was the most consistent person. I was there, and we sat together and worked out tunes, and sang little fragments on the piano, and then other people would come in and shake something or play something, and we had tapes and tapes and tapes of just messing about, So the actual album didn't really. It was probably about a year in the putting together those tracks, and I guess the first looking at it and listening to it again today, probably the first track was the one which starts the album, Another Flaming Tune.
Support for Takoma Radio comes from the Old Takoma Business Association. supporting independently owned local businesses that stretch from Takoma Junction to the Takoma Theater. More information on Takoma businesses and upcoming events at mainstreettacoma.org and on social media with the handle at Main Street Takoma. As mentioned at the beginning of this episode of Lost Treasures, Flaming Tunes is a collection of 11 highly personal and diverse tracks written and performed by Mary and Gareth, ranging from lo-fi pop songs to abstract musical collages to instrumental numbers influenced by the music of Kathakali dance from the southern tip of India. Flaming Tunes is unlike any other British album of the mid-1980s. It embraces the experimental nature of this heat while at the same time demonstrating Gareth's penchant for urbane pop songs with sophisticated and beautiful lyrics. Let's hear the third instrumental track from side one entitled A to B, which incorporates Indian rhythms, followed by the fourth track from side one, The Best Weapon. This latter song, sung by Gareth, gives us some insight into his personal philosophy on the world, warning us to beware of the friend who becomes a master, and reminding us the best weapon is the weapon of learning.
They say effort is an inexhaustible source. And that if it wasn't for hope, the heart would break. Beware of the friend who becomes a master. The best weapon is the weapon of learning. In the days of the upward curve, looking down on someone who had the nerve to look up to you. Say, who are you? Now where are you?
Yeah, I guess we just started there, and so just putting together sounds, and then Gareth would spend a lot of time with those sounds, putting it into something that resembled a piece of music, I suppose. So Gareth's and my idea, I suppose, when we were putting together these, playing together and spending afternoons just sort of footling about, really. I don't think we ever really thought that it would be something that would be an album, or that we would ever get out and play, or actually play live. It was just something that was so enjoyable, and it was something that he so needed to get out of his system, I think. And then it was like, why don't we make a cassette, and we can we'll do
that. Was the sort of compromise in those days, wasn't it?
Yeah.
To scale down from making a vinyl LP, which took a budget, and in our case, sort of external interest, and to make a cassette, which was somehow affordable.
Yeah, well, we worked. I'd been involved in a community arts project, which had sort of visual art and craft, but it also had a music component called Medium Wave, and Medium Wave got a grant to buy, I think it was a dozen Porter studios, which on a community basis could be hired out. So you could hire out a Porter studio and take it away and produce something that was kind of quite acceptable in terms of its quality.
Yeah.
And so that's what we did. We borrowed that, and so we did a lot of the stuff on the Porter Studio. It's only in later stuff after Flaming Tunes that we worked on a sort of 12-track and started to get a bit more sophisticated. But no, the tracks, it just suddenly seemed like a good idea. Why don't we just, and we had some covers printed, and we used to take them out with us when we went to visit people and get people to colour them in, because they were all sort of hand coloured. And so we just take them around, and people just have pens and pencils and just fill them in. I've got one or two left, but we made a run of about 50 cassettes. And well, yeah, I mean, we didn't have the World Wide Web in those days. I'm going to talk about one of the tracks, Beguiling the Hours, and it's well, the words I mean came from, we were studying history of art together briefly before Gareth left for this heat, and it was we were studying the art of Delacroix, and so the words come from Delacroix's diaries, but the tune, again, I think it was just something that we sort of found on the piano, and then embellished, and then a bit of clarinet. It's a bit sort of ramshackle, but it's quite lively, and it's something that I'm sort of working with some people at the moment, and we've put together another version of it.
Beguiling the hours with fruitless projects, 1,000 precious thoughts miscarried through lack of continued effort, through lack of continued effort. Devour us, they give us up to
Yeah, Breaststroke was the one and only track I got to play on. And I was very pleased to be invited to do that. And of course, I'd listened to it. And my friend, our friend, Martin Harrison, had contributed the rhythmic track for this on a drum machine, but he really made the drum machine work quite hard, I think. I played a descant recorder over this beautiful song about swimming, which had become a love of Gareth's, hadn't it?
Definitely, yeah. I think swimming was a real revelation to him, to learn to breathe, to swim, because, you know, when you're learning to swim, you know, you can do one length and then you're just completely out of breath. But once he got the rhythm, and, you know, he just loved it. And that's what that song's all about. Just yes, I'll talk about Generous Moon, and I like the way it starts with my son ringing a bell and saying, "We can make a nice sound now." And I think that's how, I think one of your last questions is, how would you describe flaming tunes to somebody who didn't know it. And I think that I'd use that, we can make a nice sound now, and it is nice, it's and it's sort of from the heart, really, I think.
The world is full of songs. How I wonder what you are. The old woman in the red hat couldn't keep from cutting a slice of the moon. And the generous moon it nightly comes and sets foot in her yard until her knife has pared them into a rind of little light. Until her knife has pared them into a rind of little light. The sky is full of stars.
And because it's got two parts, because it's got the flute in the second part, like a flute instrumental, and that was Alice Granger playing the flute, and she played it in a different key, so it was supposed to be within the actual track, but because it was in a different key, it was just sort of like put on after, as a continuation of the song. And we sang it at Nick and myself and Helen East. We sang it at Gareth's Memorial concert in London. I suppose about 4 months after he passed.
Yeah, I couldn't be there
you
on
weren't there,
that
were you?
night.
But you did the backing track for
I'd
it.
done the backing, and I'd flown
Yeah.
stateside the day before.
But it's a bit. It's also a bit sort of nursery sort of rhyme, but it's a favourite track of mine. Yeah.
In the remaining minutes of Lost Treasures, let's hear from Mary and Mick about Gareth's final days, his passing, and 2 more recordings made by Gareth and Mary. First, an unreleased track from the many tracks that are in Mary's archives, followed by my own personal favorite Flaming Tunes track, Nothing On.
I don't think we ever thought it would ever go anywhere. We just, it was something we did. We kind of did sort of send out some of the cassettes, and obviously they ended up in other countries. And then when the web came up, and there was discussion forums about this music, and it was all out there. Whereas we just thought it just disappeared into the ether. People could pinch it. Yes.
Like there was a Japanese bootleg of it, which was described as being by this heat, wasn't it?
Yeah. So a lot of misunderstanding about it, which...
well, it wasn't misunderstanding, it was piracy.
Okay. So Gareth got sick. I suppose he was sick for about... Well, he I think when he came back from India, he'd had hepatitis, and I think that had taken its toll. But he ultimately got a tumour in his brain. And he lived for, I don't know, about a few months. But I think the primary cause was in his lung. But I didn't see an awful lot of him at that point. I kind of got into completely different things. We got back and did a bit of music in the late 90s, but then there was a period when I just didn't really see very much of him. And I think he retreated. He retreated into, he was living back at his sister's home. The flat where he'd lived, it had all sort of broken up, and he'd gone there, and his partner Nick, I suppose, nursed him and his sister. And then ultimately, I mean, he died in hospital, and I didn't actually know until later that day that he'd actually passed. But so the memorial service for Gareth was in April 2002 at
93 feet.
Yeah, a place in Brick Lane in the East End. It was a really nice place, and there were lots of people playing. I mean, Wire played, and Charles Hayward played, Charles Bullen played, someone from the pop group played, Jim Homosexuals played. I mean, it was just a really lovely evening. And there was another room that showed films, and there was a bit of Coronation Street, I think, because he used to follow the soaps and stuff. So yeah, it was a nice concert. But I mean, he was 47, when he passed away, so it was pretty horrendous, really. Yeah. So Nick passed away in 2007, so six years later, and it's his birthday today. So we raise a glass to him.
We do. Here it is. Someday.
Yes. Well, maybe you want to talk a bit more about Nick, because you
I
after him,
kind of took on a carer excuse me, role in his final time, and that was very sad. And we went to India to scatter Gareth's ashes, and then Nick himself had health problems and was terminally ill. So, it was all a sad conclusion to lives.
And I think we'd always thought that, we would all sort of, grow old together. So go and live in the country and have dogs and, just and do music. But, it never happened.
Yeah, when Flaming Tunes got reissued, there was a group of us working on it, which included, of course, Mary and myself, but also sound engineer Martin Harrison, who'd also played on Flaming Tunes, and who else? Andrew Jacques was very involved. He'd been a fan and owner of a record store in London, These Record Store, and he too was greatly involved in this multi-way process of remastering, sticking together the things from different sessions. I think it was one of those things where there were 2 reels of tape, but one had been lost. So we had to recreate some things using cassette and so on. Mary is the custodian of Gareth's ongoing legacy.
I am. I am the. I have got endless cassettes that were then mastered onto CDs. So that, you know, everything that we did is now sort of, you know, archived through Andrew Jakes. You know, doing that piece of work, and there, you know, there may be interest in putting out some of that at some point in the future.
music be the food of love, play on.